This presentation is about experiences with the use of participatory epidemiology to understand women's knowledge on the seasonality and causes of acute malnutrition in Karamoja, Uganda. The presenter is Raphael Lotira Arasio. Something about Karamoja sub-region of Uganda. This region is in northeast Uganda. It's a remote, semi-arid area inhabited mainly by agropastoralist and pastoralist communities. And its human population is approximately 1 million people, and it's characterized by economic and political marginalization relative to the rest of Uganda, and also has low human development indicators relative to the rest of Uganda. About the problem of malnutrition in Karamoja. In common with many other pastoralist areas of East Africa, Karamoja region has experienced high levels of acute malnutrition for decades. And high levels of acute malnutrition have persisted or worsened despite large-scale development programs. For example, in 2016, there were 24 nutrition projects or programs in Karamoja implemented by 17 organizations. Statistics show that in 2016, 10% of children were wasted compared to a national average for Uganda of 3.6%. And between 2010 and 2019, biannual global acute malnutrition measured by nutrition surveys revealed that in June each year, global acute malnutrition increased from 11.5% to 13.8%. And in December each year, global acute malnutrition increased from 9.8% to 10.4%. From what we can see here, the situation really warrants action. And this action is in the form of evidence, in the form of programming, and in the form of methodology. In terms of evidence, what gaps did Karamoja Resilience Support Unit identify? Looking at seasonality of malnutrition, it's widely known that in agricultural systems, malnutrition is often associated with seasonality of livelihoods. And it's for this reason that biannual food security and nutrition assessment surveys have been conducted in Karamoja in May, June, and November, December. And this has been done since 2009. And these surveys have been able to provide point prevalence estimate of child malnutrition. But these prevalences fit the patterns of food security and nutrition in agrarian systems, and that is in crop-based livelihood. However, experiences from similar regions in East Africa have shown that seasonality of food security and nutrition is different in pastoralist areas. In pastoralist areas, pastoralists typically associate rain with the types of plenty of milk, which is good for nutrition and health. And pastoralists also describe livelihoods and nutritional stress towards the end of long dry season. That's when there is declining milk supply. In addition, food security and nutrition assessment surveys were conducted at 2 points in a year. And some of the weaknesses that we noted were that these surveys did not cover other months. And therefore, the monthly variation in global acute malnutrition was unknown. And this has important implications for nutrition programming. Again, looking at the way estimation of acute malnutrition is measured, it begs the question, how can preventive measures for acute malnutrition be delivered at the right time if the monthly patterns in acute malnutrition prevalence are not known? We also looked more broadly at the causes of persistent of global acute malnutrition in different regions and countries. And this has been proposed that a better understanding of seasonality, livelihoods, and gender is needed. And further, a better understanding of how communities describe or prioritize the causes of acute malnutrition is needed. However, such a kind of required participatory analysis was limited for Karamoja. And what methodological innovation was adopted by Karamoja Resilience Support Unit to address some of the nutrition survey gaps and programming concerns? Now, based on the observations that we've noted above, we find that Karamoja Resilience Support Unit proposed and used an alternative methodological approach called Participatory Epidemiology to understand acute malnutrition in Karamoja. And what is this participatory epidemiology? This approach evolved in NGO projects in pastoralist areas of the Horn of Africa in the mid-1990s, and it involved systematic use of participatory methods to understand the epidemiology and the economics of diseases and disease control options. It was based on indigenous knowledge and the professional recognition of this knowledge as an international and intellectual resource. International agencies such as World Organization for Animal Health and Food and Agriculture Organization have recognized and supported their use. Currently, participatory epidemiology has been reported as a method in peer-reviewed papers and postgraduate dissertations. It's also been covered in epidemiological textbooks, and it's being taught in postgraduate veterinary epidemiology courses. When we look at its use in other disciplines and sectors, we see that it's evolving. For instance, some of the rare examples include its use in livestock marketing, its use in assessment of performance of income-generating groups and activities, in COVID-19 impact assessments, and in project impact assessments. However, when you look at the pastoralist areas of East Africa, the use of this approach, as well as the associated methods in human health and nutrition sectors, has been limited. Then, which participatory epidemiology methods were used in the study that was undertaken by Karamoja Resilience Support Unit? And to assess what? The Karamoja Resilience Support Unit adopted the following methods. One, an initial ethnographic approach, and this was to understand the language used by agropastoralist women to describe malnutrition and related issues. Second method was monthly calendar, and this was to enable agropastoral women to describe the monthly variation in acute malnutrition in children and women and the related livelihood factors. And the third was a combination of causal diagram and proportional piling. And this was to identify and prioritize the root causes of acute malnutrition in children and mothers and describe any relationships between different causes, especially from the perspective of women. And also to understand women's preferences for reducing acute malnutrition occurrence. From a methodological perspective, the study aimed to assess if and how experiences with participatory epidemiology methods could be adopted for use in a study on human malnutrition. This is an example of a monthly calendar constructed by the pastoralist and agropastoralist women. Now, what were the major findings from the study or from these experiences? With regard to the language used by agropastoralist women to describe malnutrition and related issues, we found that women had a rich and detailed vocabulary related to malnutrition and related issues. Although the Karamoja language, which is commonly spoken in the Karamoja sub-region, was used in all the districts surveyed, there were numerous dialectic differences or preferences related to the language used. And this has implications for nutrition-related education and programming. With regard to seasonality of acute malnutrition, in the pastoralist and agropastoralist areas, we noted the following. Looking at this graph, you can see that child malnutrition peaks in January, and malnutrition is shown by the blue line. And this is associated with the limited access to animal milk at the end of the dry season. And that is shown by the yellow line. And this also coincided with depletion of the grain stocks. And this is shown by the green line. Now, malnutrition declines at the onset of the main rains, and this is associated with improving availability of animal milk. One other thing is that women were able to explain the seasonal variations in acute malnutrition and the related factors. Again, with regard to seasonality, we found that there was a strong correlation between malnutrition and the related factors, such as availability of milk. And if you look at this table, you can see there was a strong agreement between independent participant groups. And this is shown by the Kendall's coefficient of concordance. With regard to the priority root causes of acute malnutrition, women consistently identified two main root causes of malnutrition as low livestock assets, which led to insufficient animal milk, and the gendered social norms that made women responsible for household meals and any related food production and income. And we noted that these two root causes were interlinked, as low livestock ownership placed additional workloads on women, which had negative impacts on childcare. With regard to women's preferences to reduce occurrence of malnutrition, we noted that women narrated traditional mechanisms that they use to minimize malnutrition. An example is the use of emuna, which is a recipe made out of meat, cereals, butter, local fruits, and others. And women were actually nostalgic about this. Women also identified weaknesses in external interventions on nutrition. And an example is the distribution of expired nutrition kits. And women also suggested priorities for nutrition-related programming. And you can see some of those priorities are on that table, which includes distribution of food relief at difficult times such as drought, restocking, support to income generation activities, education for children, healthcare, hygiene and sanitation, sensitization of men, cash for work programs, and stopping gin whiskey production. With regard to reproducibility and validity of participatory epidemiology methods, we found that these methods were reproducible, and this was shown by the significant agreement between independent women groups. Then, with validity of these methods, we took an example of monthly calendar and considered one indicator, rainfall. And the way we did this was to compare the results from the monthly calendar method with the objective measures of rainfall using monthly rain gauge data from Namalu in Karamoja between 1947 and 1987. And what you can see here is actually similarities in the rainfall pattern between monthly calendar and objective rainfall data. To conclude, one, the seasonality of acute malnutrition in Karamoja did not follow a typical agrarian pattern of high acute malnutrition during the rainy season or before the harvest. But it peaked in the dry season as the availability of unproduced staple foods and especially milk decline. Two, from a livelihood perspective, women requested assistance to reduce acute malnutrition, and this assistance included provision of livestock and income generation opportunities that enabled child care. However, their preferences contrasted with nutrition programs in the region, which focused on the treatment of acute malnutrition through healthcare centers and social and behavior change activities, which assumed that women's knowledge on nutrition was limited. Three, the study showed how gender issues were prominent causes of acute malnutrition, and these were prioritized and clearly explained by women. However, in terms of aid programs, women described their involvement in gender-related behavior activities, but noted that men were not often targeted. Looking at the monthly calendar, the results clearly showed the pattern of acute malnutrition by month. This was not captured in biannual food security and nutrition assessment surveys, and so, to our knowledge, this information had not been previously reported for Karamoja. On women's causal analysis, this was remarkably similar to UNICEF framework, but with far more emphasis on livelihoods, gender, and seasonality. On reproducibility and validity of participatory epidemiology methods, the evidence shows that the methods are reproducible and valid and could therefore be used to complement conventional methods and approaches used by nutritionists, such as quantitative surveys and nutrition causal analysis. In terms of learnings and recommendations, one, nutrition programs are unlikely to impact on malnutrition unless the root causes of acute malnutrition are addressed. Two, with persisting or rising acute malnutrition, there is need for us to revisit the causal logic of nutrition programs in the region and design programs with far greater participation of communities. In addition, design activities that recognize the seasonal variation in nutritional status and related factors in pastoralist areas. Three, for food security and nutrition assessment surveys to detect maximum and minimal levels of acute malnutrition, the timing of the survey should be revised to take place in January and September each year. A method such as monthly calendar could be a useful complement to FSNA surveys in Karamoja and could also strengthen approaches to nutrition causal analysis that use limited community. With regard to experience with participatory epidemiology methods, they demonstrated that despite their limited formal education, women should be actively involved in joint analysis of acute malnutrition and the programming options, and that their indigenous knowledge should be valued and respected. Finally, in general, the evidence from this study shows that participatory epidemiology methods could complement more conventional approaches in dry land areas, such as quantitative nutrition and food security surveys. Thank you very much.